Alliance. Yeah, that's one of the notes I was going to tell you is this presentation is being recorded, and following the presentation, you will get an evaluation form for you to fill out to help us with future trainings, and a link to the recording and a link to the slide deck. And the links in the slide deck will be live. So if we move quickly through some of this stuff today, which we will,
Can't hear anything. Can anybody else?
I can't either. I lost Marilyn. Is she still on here?
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, I just submitted her back. Apparently she got lost.
Did Marilyn drop off? We got her? Okay.
I think she just randomly got kicked out. I don't know how that happened.
Oh.
Elon Musk didn't like that comment, apparently.
Sorry, guys. So did she get back in?
She's in. She's just she's muted and has her. Oh.
There. Sorry.
And she's back. We're thinking that Jeremy's word that Elon Musk didn't appreciate your comments. So.
Well, too bad. So sad. Okay. Welcome. We are recording this, and you will be getting a link to the slide deck with links and the recording when you get your evaluation form, which we really would appreciate your completing. We'd like to have you keep your microphones muted unless you're and if you have questions, put them in the chat or raise your hand. And Edwina's monitoring the chat for us. Trying to think of other things. Oh, the one thing that I want to remind you about, I think when you got your reminder message, it said, please have paper and pen nearby because you're going to be wanting to take some notes and begin developing your story. So we want you to be able to do that during the course of this presentation. So we have a lot of information. We have a day's worth of information that we're going to throw at you in about 3 hours. So we're going to be moving fast, but like I said, you'll be getting information afterward that you can look into more deeply. And there's a few interactive pieces that will be part of this presentation. So I'd like to introduce our presenters. And I'm going to start with AARP at the beginning of the alphabet. Do you want to advance that slide, Francoise? And Francoise is the policy director of AARP Idaho and works really closely with the ICA on legislative and policy issues. She's been really helpful in establishing kind of how we operate policy-wise. Her MPA comes from Idaho State. She has a long history in working in policy and politics. And we are grateful, beyond grateful, to have Francoise with us today and representing AARP. Next is me. I coordinate, my name is Marilyn Sword. I coordinate the Idaho Caregiver Alliance and have been doing that since about 2017. I previously worked as the director for the Council on Developmental Disability, so I'm kind of merging disability and aging issues. And I'm a proud alum of Boise State with both my graduate and undergraduate degree from there. And last but not least is Jeremy. And Jeremy is the director of LINC, the Independent Living Center for Southwest and South Central Idaho. He harks from Alaska and has a really eclectic background with his degrees in criminal justice administration, sociology, and applied historical research. So he too is a BSU grad, but he's got lots of other accomplishments credited to him. and he will be the third member of our team presenting this information to you today. So first of all, I just wanted to take advantage of mentioning to you what the Idaho Caregiver Alliance is. We are a statewide coalition of individual caregivers, organizations, agencies, people with disabilities, and you can see some of our alliance partners here. We've been funded for the last 10 or 12 years through the Administration on Community Living through a grant to the Idaho Commission on Aging. And we are housed under the Boise State Center for the Study of Aging. We recently applied for a fourth lifespan respite grant that's been our funding foundation. And it was funded through the Division of Public Health, the Alzheimer's disease and related dementias program. And so our appreciation to them for stepping up and applying for that funding to keep us going. Next slide. Our learning objectives for today is first and foremost to develop your story into an advocacy message. And then for you to understand how you can use that now and during the legislative session to engage in advocacy. Learn a little bit about some of the policy issues that will be emerging in the coming legislative session, and primarily focusing on support for family caregivers and the direct care workforce shortage, although we recognize you shared with us other issues of concern. And then we'd like to show you some of the other groups that are working on these issues that you could partner up with if you choose to take the next step in advocating for your situation. Next slide. Family caregivers are largely invisible, and that's true in Idaho and nationally. We're the kind of people in the corner who often are not seen, but are the backbone of Idaho's long-term care system. Each year in Idaho, over the course of a year, some 300,000 individuals serve as family caregivers, providing over 201 million hours of uncompensated care at a value of $2 billion. That's billion dollars. Most caregivers are also employed part-time or full-time. 61% nationally, but 70% in Idaho. We are ranked through the latest AARP long-term services and supports scorecard. We are ranked as 34th in the nation in supports for family caregivers, so we've got some work to do. And in all states across the country, caregivers experience high levels of worry, stress, depression, exhaustion. And so I think it's really important that we recognize caregivers and give them the support and tools they need to keep providing care. Next slide. So what we're going to do here is we want to share with you some personas of caregivers. And I'd like to have you, because we think of caregivers as someone caring for an older parent or an older relative. Sometimes we think of it as a younger person caring for a child with a disability, but caregiving has lots of faces. And so we thought we would share with you some personas of caregivers and then see if you see yourself in some of these situations. Here we're starting with Carlos. Carlos is 31. He's a single professional. He takes care of his dad and the rest of his family regularly. He's kind of the rock of the family. And he doesn't consider himself a caregiver. He just is, this is just what he does as part of his family responsibility. So with each of these personas, we're going to do a little poll and see what Jeremy and Francoise and I thought might be things that these individuals could benefit from, but we'd like to see what you think. And so Edwina is going to pop up a poll, and here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to click on what you think Carlos might need. And don't just pick one. I mean, pick whatever you think is appropriate for him. And then let's submit it. And then we'll see what everybody thinks about what might help Carlos. And if you think there's things it's only letting us do one, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, let's see what that reveals. And when you're through, then click submit, and then the poll will come back up. Will we all see it, Edwina?
Yeah, I can broadcast the results to everyone.
That'd be great. Okay. If most everybody has submitted their response. Interesting. HR support got just a little 4%, but most thought paid family leave, which may be through his HR support, and home health care for his dad, somebody else to help him, so it's not just Carlos doing this work. So thank you. Are we going to be able to keep the results of these polls, Edwina?
I believe so.
Okay. Hopefully. Let's move to the next persona. And this is Sandra. And Sandra is married to a veteran who experienced a traumatic brain injury. And that's left him unable to work. So she's the sole breadwinner in this family. Her husband also, part of the impact of his TBI is that he has severe depression. They have 2 little kids. And so she's keeping all those balls in the air, trying to balance all those and take care of herself. And thankfully, she has coworkers and friends that let her vent to them. But what do you think that Sandra might benefit from most? Okay, has everybody submitted? Let's publish it. Well, this is not unusual from what we hear all the time, is the need for her to have a break from caregiving for her kids and her husband, and also some mental health support for her and for her husband. So thanks very much, and I'll be interested to see for those 4% who picked other, what you put in the chat. Can you see that, Edwina?
I don't see anything in the chat yet. Oh,
Okay.
Resources that can help with care planning.
Thanks, Kim. Let's move to the next person. And this is Leah. Leah is 62. Leah is a kin care provider. She's caring for her grandson with special needs. And it's not a position she expected to be in. She's working part-time and caring for her grandson. She has her own health problems. Mostly she's focused on him, and she's worried about what's going to happen with him. She's very positive, but she really is in denial about the needs that she might have. So let's see what we thought would be beneficial to her. Resource navigator services, medical guidance, kin care, a support group. That's for families caring for other than their own child. Alternative daycare, school-based services, or other. So what do you think might help her the most? When you think we've got most everyone in, Edwina? Let's,
Oh, here we go. I wasn't getting the poll for a second.
We have about 8 people left.
okay. Okay, if you could submit so that Edwina can, well, Resource Navigator Services, we can do something about. The Family Caregiver Navigator, which is part of the ICA, provides free access to navigator services for caregivers across the lifespan. So alternative daycare, when her grandson is not in school, are there places that he can go? And then also some support for Leah, that kin care support group. And do put, Sarah put pay for care at home by the family. And we're hearing that more and more, Sarah. So thank you for adding that. And let's go to our last persona, and that is Nana. Nana's 82. She and her husband live independently, and that's how she likes it. She does not want to move him into a facility. She doesn't ask for help. It's very difficult for her. She is, excuse me. She relies heavily on her kids and her doctor and the members of her church. And she's not a tech savvy person. So she's not somebody who's going to Google a particular issue. She's just going to kind of muddle through. And so what do you think Nana might benefit from? Navigator services again, some workshop on tech, connecting to her local area agency on aging, some respite care for her, someone to come into her home and stay with her husband, some home and community-based services for her husband, maybe some modification for their home. What do you think she would benefit most from? And we'll give it just about 15 seconds for everybody to put their choice in. Connecting to her area agency on aging. I think this is really someplace that Nana would feel more comfortable. And then hooking her up with some services for her husband. And that might include the navigator services, helping to set that up. And then some respite, maybe some respite from Legacy Corps. You never know kind of where that might come from. So thank you all for participating in our polls. And we're through exploring our personas. I hope you saw yourself in some of those. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jeremy, to talk to us about our journey from this point forward. Jeremy?
Okay, this is Jeremy. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up. Okay, super. Marilyn, thanks for that. And thanks to everybody for showing up to this training, whether you're a person who provides care, paid or unpaid, or whether you receive care, whether you work for an agency or an organization, or you're just here as an advocate. It's great to be with all of you on Zoom and to share this information. Much of this information you may already know. Some of this information might be new to some of you. But please feel free to drop questions and comments in the chat as we move through this. So I'm going to focus primarily on the storytelling component and the ask of your story component. And then Francoise is going to talk a little bit about the process, legislative process, and opportunities for engagement. And so really we're going to look at how do you develop the story you want to tell. And what's really important is what your specific ask is that you attach to your story. We're going to help you figure out how to locate your lawmakers and learn a little bit about the legislative process. Francoise is going to follow a bill through the legislature and talk about that. And then we'll highlight some storytelling opportunities, how that gets done through public testimony, meetings, letters, things like that. We'll talk a little bit about who else is working on this issue that you can lean on for resources or support, or organizations you might want to advocate through or with. And then we'll all get together to start telling and sharing our story and doing the important work that we're all here to do. Okay, let's go. So we're going to start with your caregiving story, and your journey starts here. And I love this slide. I was saying to Marilyn and Francoise yesterday that I use a manual wheelchair, and I can feel the tension in the guy in the wheelchair as he gets pushed towards that hill. I have felt that before, so I appreciated that graphic, and I find it's kind of entertaining. Let's move to the next. Okay. So really what we're all here for a reason, and that reason is that we know we need to help our caregivers, unpaid and paid caregivers in the state of Idaho. I think we have all in one way or another experienced the impacts of not having access to resources for caregiving, or being exhausted by caring for someone that we love, or trying to access paid caregiving through different agencies, traditional or self-direct. And we've all, I think, been, we have been carrying the weight of this problem for many, many years. But during the pandemic, I think that it was really exacerbated, and the cracks that a lot of us knew were in that system made themselves very apparent. And so that's one of the reasons why we're all here and why we're talking about storytelling. But advocacy is really all about taking action to make a positive change, whether that's improving the situation for caregivers, or getting better transportation, or getting potholes filled in your neighborhood. Advocacy is about us working together, usually, to create some positive change. This is important in the sense that it's really easy for us to see individual problems as just that, individual problems in our lives. And one of the things that is important with our advocacy together is to make sure that everybody knows that we're not alone. Like, your situation with caregiving and the problems and stress that you feel aren't because of a poor decision you made or some flaw with you as a person. These are larger structural issues in society that need to be changed and improved so we all have better outcomes. And advocacy really takes hold and is more effective when we all are working together, pushing towards a common goal. It improves our laws, policies, structures. We remove systemic barriers. We make sure the priorities that are important to us are heard. And then overall, just improving our lives for the better. Let's go to the next slide. In storytelling, well, let me go to this first. We're going to talk about advocacy and telling our story to influence the legislative process. But it's also important to realize that what we're doing, talking to lawmakers, our storytelling, this form of advocacy, is really part of a larger landscape of what you could call activism or advocacy. And storytelling plays a critical part in that. But so and we're not going to get into a lot of details about this, but there are other ways for you to get engaged as well as telling your story with a lawmaker. You can participate in a local election. You could run for office. You could write a letter to the editor, which is a form of storytelling. You could go to outreach events that your elected official might be hosting and ask questions of them and ask them to respond to your priorities and how they're going to deal with your priorities. There are professional lobbyists that are paid to go to the Capitol and talk about these issues. So when we talk about social change and advocacy, just know that landscape is really wide, but we're going to be focusing on this kind of narrow aspect, which is telling our story to lawmakers so they hear us and they understand what we're facing and what we want. Not just what our problems are, but what we think the solutions are to those problems. Let's go to the next slide. And storytelling is so important because I mean, think about our own lives, right? Like when we get home from work and we are talking to our partner, spouse, husband, wife, kids, we usually have a story that we're telling about the day, something we heard. If it's a particularly interesting or exciting story, like we find pleasure in sharing that with the people around us. We've done this for thousands and thousands of years. This is how we've communicated for many, many years until, you know, we had cave drawings and developed paper and writing and all these other things. It was all oral storytelling that we passed information along for a very, very long time. And it is still a deeply rooted component of who we are as human beings, as social beings. And that's why it's so powerful, because everybody understands how to tell a story generally, and how to, and they know what it feels like to hear a good story and then even want to pass that story on, right? I think we call that gossip. Although we are not going to be gossiping, we're going to be actually devising our stories here. So your personal story can have a significant impact on driving policy changes. Sharing your experience will raise awareness about the challenges that you face, and it will influence policymakers to make a positive change. I will tell you that in a former life, I spent some time as an elected official, as a borough assemblyman and as a mayor. And we would always have somebody show up at a city council meeting or a borough assembly meeting. And the one thing that struck me in my short amount of time doing that, although very rewarding short amount of time, was that it didn't matter if there were 50 people that showed up or if there was one person that showed up. If a single person showed up at a meeting and shared their story with us and explained kind of what they were facing and what they thought the solution to that problem was, it didn't even matter how many people were in the room. I personally was really compelled by that, and it put on me a certain amount of responsibility now that I knew that problem existed and I had a personal connection with that person's story. It created a higher level of accountability for me as an elected official to try and solve that problem, or try and bring resources to that person so they could solve that problem. So don't ever think that your single story isn't enough to move mountains. It is, and it does. And I can tell you that the stories that have been told at different committee hearings and in different places over the last several years has made an impact on lawmakers. I don't know that they know what the solution is yet, and we're going to help them get there. But I definitely know that this issue is on the radars of people who it otherwise may not have been on. And that was in large part because of the stories that they have been told. So like I said, stories create a personal connection. They're more memorable and they humanize issues. And everybody has a really unique story. Sometimes we remember data, but if you think about your life and stories that have stuck with you, are they about data or a pie chart or a graph that you saw? They're usually a story about a person and something that person experienced. I have stories that I remember from 40 years ago that I still tell because they were so compelling and they mean so much to me. So I just want to emphasize how important what is relatively seemingly a simple thing, like just sharing a story in an elevator with a lawmaker, super important. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So, and I apologize for looking down too. I've got some notes and I'm going to refer to those. So when you develop your story, you're going to want to think about your story's got a couple key pieces or ingredients that you're going to want to make sure that you think about. You're going to want to make sure that you introduce yourself. Who are you? Are you a parent, a worker? Are you a mom, a dad, a grandmother, grandfather? Are you somebody's son or caretaker? Who are you? Why are you, what's your story? What's your story? We even asked that question, like, what's your story? Where do you live in Idaho? Do you live in a rural town, in an urban town, in a suburban town? It's not only important to tell people that because you want them to know where you're from. Oftentimes, people will have a personal connection with a place that you may be from and may have family or friends in that community. And that helps them remember that story. And again, that helps create more accountability on elected officials if they have that personal connection. Your story needs to be relatable. And there's a couple ways to do that. Asking questions like, have you ever imagined, have you ever been in a situation like this? Do you know someone who's been in a situation like this? I think about talking to a state lawmaker, and these are questions it's fair to ask. It engages the person that you're sharing your story with in a way that makes them think about their own circumstances. And well, let me think about that. In fact, I do have an uncle in a different state, but he's taking care of his wife, and they mentioned having problems with direct care workers, or maybe he talked about being burnt out and tired, not sure what to do. So asking lawmakers who are generally very busy and have a lot on their minds to just pause for a moment and reflect on their own life could be a very powerful way to get them bought in or engaged in your story. Make it personal. Again, it's great to have data, and data is important. Data should amplify our stories and should align with our stories. But really, it is those personal stories that we remember. So making sure that you're highlighting the challenges that you face, what the impact has been to you, maybe to your finances, and then how did you get through it? This is super important because you're an expert in what you're experiencing. You can speak with confidence and with detail about how a particular issue that we know impacts tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people when you start talking about caregiving. When you make it personal to your situation, you're going to come off with that level of detail and confidence in a way that's going to be more convincing for somebody as you tell your story. Make it short and to the point. We don't often, when we talk with lawmakers, have the luxury of, an hour-long conversation with them. Oftentimes it could be a 15-minute conversation in a hallway. It could be a 5-minute conversation on the phone. It could literally be 30 seconds with somebody who you've been trying to get a meeting with, and you just happen to be in the elevator with them. And many of you have probably heard of an elevator pitch or an elevator statement. And the whole idea here is that you need to be able to communicate in the amount of time it takes to ride an elevator from one floor to the other, to tell your story and to make your ask. Like, oh my gosh, Senator, Senator Sword, I'm so lucky to catch you here. I know you're busy and I know you're going to get off the elevator. I just want you to know that I take care of a family member and I have been exhausted, and we need more resources to support our families and our loved ones. And it would be really great if you would do something about the reimbursement rates. Bam, right? Door opens, they walk out. They hear that a few times. That amplification of that message and that issue is gonna make an impact. And then finally here, connecting the story to larger issues. Again, I teach sociology at Boise State. I have for the last 15 years. And this is the focus of the class that I teach, is thinking sociologically, or what we call the sociological imagination. C. Wright Mills calls it the sociological imagination. But it's the whole idea that we need to uncover these larger social forces at play that we don't see very easily and we don't understand are there, but that makes us think that these problems are just our problems and they're not problems that impact everyone. And so it's really important that as we talk about these issues, that we are connecting them to these larger issues in the community. Mostly because I don't know that all lawmakers understand these issues at the depth that they need to make the best decisions for the people that are getting the services and supports that the state offers. And so it's very important for us to not make assumptions about what they know and to connect the dots. for people. Let's see, what else do I want to say? Let's see. The last thing I'll say is when you're telling a story or making a pitch to someone, it's important to have often what's called a hook. And that hook is a little nugget of something that gets the person you're telling a story to kind of be intrigued or want to learn more or explore that conversation more with you. And so thinking about kind of what your hook is, or, you know, oh my gosh, like I live down in this little town and you won't believe the situation I ran into and and right away that person might be like, well, tell me more. I want to know where this story is going. So thinking about your hook, but these are all components that you're going to want to think about as you develop your story about direct care and unpaid caregiving, family caregiving, and the conversations that you're going to have with lawmakers. So let's go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about your story. And the first thing I want to do is I want to share an example of a story, a very short story, 1 minute, that was captured as part of a campaign tool that we were putting together at Link and with Marilyn and a number of other people called Power Independent Living. And this is it's a web platform where we can share stories, we can share news articles, resources and things about direct care in Idaho. And this is one of the little snippets of a story that we captured. And go ahead and let's play that.
She's my longest staff that I have ever had. She's really comfortable with the way I help her communicate, and whatever she needs, I find a way to get it for her. And she appreciates that kindness. We couldn't find people to work for what we can pay for Medicaid. There's just no staff out there available for direct care. We had to go through an agency just to get people in here to help. There's a lot of stuff I cannot physically do anymore. That's been very difficult on both of us. They don't want to do it for what I can pay.
Okay. So that was an example of kind of a quick, short story that somebody was telling to a camera, not necessarily to a lawmaker, but you could see that story started out very personal. It wasn't about reimbursement rates. It wasn't about wages. It wasn't about any of that. It was very personal about the day-to-day activities of someone's communication. And then it kind of got into the conversation about wages and pay and the impact that has. And then the ask, of course, is kind of part of the website and the other content out there. But we just wanted to share like a really quick example of somebody telling a story and how personal it should be when you are talking to a lawmaker about your situation. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is the fun part, talking about being naughty and what you shouldn't do. But we'll start with what to do, first of all. There are some pretty straightforward rules about, you know, let's call them best practices about what you want to do when you're telling a story. But then there are also some things that you really, 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 really want to stay away from for a bunch of reasons. And we'll talk about those. But again, the do's, let's just get into those and then we'll go to the fun stuff. You need to have a succinct story and you need to really know what your main points are. All right. I love asking people what their story is. I have a podcast show where I just interview people with disabilities who work in the disability world, because I'm constantly, it's annoying to people how how much I want to ask them about kind of where are you at, where are you from. Marilyn can attest to this because I had her on and tortured her with an interview. But but you really need to be succinct, and you need to keep it simple, and you need to really know what your main points are. Okay. And you need to make an ask. I know that, for example, I am fortunate to be a member of the City of Boise's cross disability advisor task force, I guess is what it's called. And when the pandemic hit and there's all kinds of money available, the City of Boise, the mayor's office asked, what is the disability community? What do you all on this advisory task force, like, what do you want? What do you need? And I remember that we put together a very clear plan with very specific asks. This is what we want and why. This is what we want and why. Here's what the impact would be. And we, gave that to the mayor's office. And I was surprised at the feedback that we got. And the feedback was, oh my gosh, thank you guys so much for being specific about what you want and what you need. I have 5 other committees that no one has asked us for anything. They talk about a lot of stuff, but they have not said, we need these 5 things, and here's why. And so that to me was an affirmation that especially elected leaders, you need to be very clear about what you're asking them to do, what you need them to do, because otherwise you're not going to get what you need if you don't ask for it. I mean, Medicaid has been, told by the Office of Performance Evaluation, you guys need to ask what you need. Ask the legislature what you need. And even they have a hard time asking for what they need. So it's really important to not shy away from that. We can, depending on our personality types, it can be difficult to ask for help. But what you're actually doing when you're making your ask is asking for help. So step up to the plate, be clear about what you need, and don't shy away from the ask. Super important. A couple other things. Be polite and be respectful. No matter who the lawmaker is, no matter what their partisan background, no matter how awful or great they were on a particular bill that you might have supported or opposed, if you're not polite and respectful, you're going to get a door closed on you pretty quick. And then everybody's just wasting their time at that point. So don't inadvertently close the door. Treat others as you would want to be treated, right? The golden rule. I think that applies here. And context matters. So your story is going to be what I would say flexed in terms of the length and detail, depending on the context. If an elevator pitch versus a coffee meeting would be a little less formal and offer maybe a little back and forth with a lawmaker. If you're testifying before a committee, that's going to be a whole different format on how you tell your story. The fundamentals are the same, but they're different. And so you really need to think about the context and where and with whom your audience is and who you're telling that story to. Okay, the fun stuff, the don'ts. Otherizing, okay? Don't repeat stereotypes and don't pit groups against one another. And that can be very easy for us to do when we talk about waiver types or, nursing facilities versus, certified family homes or self-direct or things like that. It can be very easy for us to get into our funding categories and start to, even though we don't know it or realize it, kind of other different groups of people. Remember, we're all in this together, and that the only way we're going to, this boat is going to rise is the tide rises, for everybody here. So be very kind of careful about that. Jargon and statistics. If you work in this space, just for communication's sake, you kind of quickly pick up on all these acronyms and jargon, and you begin to use those because it's easier, it's easier for me to say link than to say the Living Independence Network Corporation. Oh my goodness, who came up with that name? But just be careful about jargon, or at least explain what the jargon is. Remember, you're educating as well as storytelling. Rambling, don't do what I'm doing. I'm rambling. I'm kidding. But remember, you have a short amount of time, short attention span of lawmakers. You have a very concise window in which you want to convey your story and your ask. Okay. Don't argue or blame. Don't go negative, whatever you do. And this can be hard sometimes because you might find a lawmaker that wants to kind of start talking smack about somebody. I don't know of an email that I've got where a lawmaker is responding to a question I have or a statement we put out on email to lawmakers, and I'll get a reply back, and it'll be a bash session about, well, the other party or this group or my own party. And there's just a lot of that. And, putting negative stuff out in the world like that will come back and bite you. And it's better, safer, it's more professional just to always be the one in the room who's bringing it back to the issue at hand and bringing it back to the ask, and never kind of going negative with different groups of people. Even, sometimes we can get away with it with our allies that we work a little more closely with. But unless you have a very personal relationship with a lawmaker, I would steer clear of any of this sort of stuff. Obviously never threaten, whether, physically or any other kind of threat. Like that's a no-no just in society in general. I think that's still a no-no the last time I checked. Sarcasm or being critical, again, you never know what relationships a lawmaker has with other people in the community. And so you need, again, to be, very cautious about, inside jokes or sarcasm or negative comments about other people. What you might think is a joke or funny, like this person might not think is funny at all. And, that 5-minute conversation that you had, that might be the only thing they remember, if anything, is that comment that you made, which was unnecessary and a distraction. So, and then finally, and this is probably the most important thing. I would really stay away from partisan politics. And what I mean by that is like party politics. So talking about Republicans, talking about Democrats, if a lawmaker wants to have that conversation and say those things, smile, nod your head, bring it back to the message at hand, bring it back to your ask. But don't get sucked into the trap of talking about different parties. Because I guarantee you, the minute you make a negative comment about a person or a party, the next issue that you need to solve, you're going to be at that person's door asking for a favor, right? So be very cautious of that. Let's go to the next slide. And Marilyn, holler at me if I'm getting behind on time here. Okay, so we're going to talk about the ask. But wanted to also just recognize that in the registration, we asked all of you what issues are important in addition to the direct care workforce and wages and all that sort of stuff. And there's a lot of stuff right out there that it is a priority to us that we want to see fixed. And the storytelling that you will be doing is effective, not just on the direct care workforce stuff, but also all of this other stuff. And you might have a personal story developed for each one of these in a separate ask. But we heard about, independent living, aging in place, universal design, visitable homes. Lots of folks are concerned about mental illness, particularly amongst young people. What's going to happen with Medicaid and the managed care task force recommendations, funding for certified family homes, greater advocacy around disability issues, respite for unpaid caregivers. All these things fall, I think, into broadly a common bucket, but all of these require a unique story and a unique ask as well. Let's go to the next slide. So we're gonna do a couple exercises around storytelling. And the first one we're gonna do is we're gonna just take 5 minutes and we're gonna ask all of you to just write down 1 or 2 compelling stories in your journey that will move hearts and minds, okay? So think back about, you know, is your story relatable? Is it making it personal? Being, you know, getting to the point. You know, a couple of sentences or a paragraph, if you will, around what your story is and the story that you want to bring to the table around this issue and these other issues we identified. So let's just take 5 minutes and have everybody do that. And then when you're done, just go ahead and throw a thumbs up or put a thumbs up in the chat. And once we get a sense that it sounds like most folks are done, we'll go to the next step. Marilyn, how are we doing on time? Or Edwina, I forgot who was doing them.
No, I think we're okay. I'd like to be able to. Thank you, Francoise. That's helpful. At the end of this 5 minutes, if we have time to share for a couple of shares, and then we need to be, I think, at 2:25 by the time we break, Jeremy.
And I think Denise had a private message to share the podcast link. So I just dropped it right in the chat for everybody if folks want to take a look at that or listen.
We've got about another minute.
Edwina, we have the breakout rooms coming up. Are you ready?
Yeah, I think so.
You are? Okay.
Fingers crossed.
Okay. Looks like we're. What do you think, Marilyn? We ready?
I think we're gonna go into the ask. Were we gonna do breakout
Yeah.
rooms here and breakout
After
rooms
the
later?
after the asks, yep.
I think it's after the ask.
Yep.
We'll
So
talk a
let's
little
go.
bit more, and then we'll break into some smaller groups for you to share.
Yep. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. Okay, so the previous section was more kind of like your story. You know, I'm this person, this is what I'm experiencing, this is the problem, this is how it impacts my life. That's kind of like your story. But we also said that you need to have an ask. Sharing your story and not having an ask, you know, is kind of like going to a home builder and being like, I want a house, and then hoping that they come up with, you know, the house that works for you. And guaranteed they won't, right? You're not going to get what you want. So it's really important that you're clear about what your ask is. And so how do you develop your ask? Basically, you know, and asks can be really hard because you're not policymakers, right? Like you're not spending all day looking at budgets, talking to the Department of Med. Maybe some of you are, but like generally we're not, you know, hanging out with the Department of Medicaid, like all the ins and outs of the waivers and the programs, and, you know, making laws and rules and passing budgets is a complicated thing. And so it can be very, very easy to be intimidated about your ask because you don't want to ask for the wrong thing. You don't want to sound like you don't know what you're talking about, right? It's kind of hard to make an ask, but then, you know, you don't want the lawmaker to be like, well, you didn't think that through because, you know, this is why that would never work. You don't have all, this is something I learned as a short time as an elected official. You know, you run and think that you've got all these things that you're going to do to fix this and that. But once you get in there and you start talking to people and reading things and having access to conversations that most people could care less about, all of a sudden your perspective on the world changes a little bit. And you're like, you know, I didn't actually know everything. And maybe what I thought was a solution isn't actually the right solution. So, you know, so I guess I'm bringing this up because I don't want you to feel intimidated by the ask, okay? You can create an ask that is flexible enough that a lawmaker can't dismiss it. And I'll give you an example of this. So we're dealing with direct care workers and reimbursement rates and all of these issues that have to do with direct care worker pay, for example. And we know that the reimbursement rates have not kept up with inflation and the changing economy and all of these things. And so, you know, one ask that you could make is to say, you know, hey, legislature, I want you to raise the minimum wage. I want you to raise reimbursement rates to X amount for these particular workers. And I want you to do it by this amount of time and all this sort of stuff. And that may be well and fine, but if the specifics of your ask are such that as soon as that lawmaker is having a conversation with other lawmakers and it's clear that your ask really isn't the right ask, then what good is your ask? I hope I'm making sense here. So I guess the way I would ask a lawmaker is, reimbursement rates are keeping me from accessing direct care workers. Can you guys do something about the rates so that they stay competitive over time and into the future, so we don't have to come back and have this conversation again? So that kind of an ask is broad enough where there's some negotiation room, right, behind the scenes with a lawmaker, but your fundamental ask is still a solid ask, right? We don't know how they're going to come to this solution. We don't know exactly what the rules, the laws that they're going to pass are to solve this problem, but your ask is broad enough that it has a lifespan. Okay, it's going to last a while, if that makes sense. So, okay, so when you're developing your ask, you want to, what changes would you like to see, right? You need to include that. And then is there a cost to those changes? Or are there savings to those changes? And again, don't shy away from specifics, but just know that you might say something like, well, my understanding is, caregivers, it feels like caregivers need to get paid something like at least $16 an hour. And that's just what I'm hearing from people. That might not be, you need to make sure wages are $16 an hour for direct care workers. But it is an ask with a little bit of specificity, but it's not so locked in and specific that the first time it's tested, it goes out the lawmaker's window and they're not going to think about it because, Kaylee asked for $16.50 an hour and we can only do, $15.50 an hour. So Kaylee doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm not gonna give much stock to Kaylee's ask, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to folks? I might not be explaining that the best, so I just want to do a comprehension check. Don't muddy the water with more than what pertains to the ask. So again, keep your story short, keep your focus clear, and be specific about the ask in the sense that, we need you to address reimbursement rates and pay for direct care workers. There's about a million other things that you could talk about when it comes to direct care, and you probably don't want to use that 30-second elevator ride to try and get into all of those, right? So think about the context in which you're telling your story. Some contexts lend a little better to a little more detail and a few more asks. But again, if you're in a meeting and you have 15 minutes or you're in an elevator and you have 1 minute, probably 1 minute in the state capitol since those are slow elevators, then, really focus in on that one thing that's the most important. I think about teaching and, you can have a year-long or a semester-long lesson plan and all these learning objectives. And when you add them all up, you got 150 different learning objectives in each weekly module and all this stuff. Really, for me, I think about the 1 or 2 things that I learned in a class that have stuck with me this entire time over 30 years. And I think it's the same here. They're not going to remember everything. What is the single most important thing that you want them to know and you want to ask them about? So keep it focused. Keep it focused. And we included some examples, more funding for specific programs, and a lot of these are funding. We're dealing with the legislature and budgets. That's the hard reality of it, is a lot of it's funding, but funding for transportation, funding for language and cultural competency resources to navigate Medicaid, for example, more respite services, like things like this are specific enough asks that you can get your point across to a lawmaker, but you aren't so specific, again, that the minute they go back and talk to Medicaid, your ask isn't null and void because you're asking for something that is a little bit off kilter of what they can actually deliver. Okay, let's see. And this is the last thing I'll say about this is your story is very important, but this is a great place to weave in a little bit of data, just a little bit of data. Like Marilyn talked about how unpaid caregivers contribute $2 billion in value to the state of Idaho. That's an incredible, powerful piece of data. And if that's the only piece of data that you share in your story, that's a great example of a piece of data that almost is a story in and of itself. In fact, it's the kind of data that takes on its own life, and that I find myself telling people about that data in a story form when I'm not in meetings like this. I'll tell my wife, like, oh my God, like, did you know, your family's taking care of a loved one in Pocatello. Did you know that unpaid caregivers contribute $2 billion? And that in and of itself is a very, very powerful. So look for those nuggets of data that are really compelling and weave it into your personal experience and your story. And then you're going to get the best bang for your buck. Okay. All right. Let's see. So we're going to finish the storytelling exercise by creating the ask. And so what we're going to do is we're going to break out into 3 groups. Edwina's going to, I think, automatically put you into 3 breakout rooms, and then select one of your stories. If somebody really feels like they've got this dialed in, or somebody might be shy and not want to tell your story, but pick a story and then focus on the ask for that story. Do you need more respite care, more direct care, financial assistance? And then we're going to come back and we're going to share some of those out with the group. Is everybody good on that? Feel confident?
And Jeremy, I have a question in the chat too before we move on.
Let's see.
Do you want me to read it too?
Oh, great. Is that Kaylee? Should
Yes.
we use specifics from the OPE report to back up our asks if possible? We will say, as stated in the OPE report. I think that's a fantastic idea. Yes. The Office of Performance Evaluation report that was just put out this year and approved by the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee has recommendations in it. And that's a report that was commissioned and approved by the legislature, by that committee. So it's their report. And as much as possible that you can push back to them their own data and their own reports, I think that's even better. That's a great point, Kaylee. That's even better. So yes, long answer, yes. And we'll drop a copy of the report into the chat right now.
And Diane, it's going to be, the Office of Performance Evaluation is going to be covered in the next hour as well. So.
Really good point.
Can you quickly share an example of when this approach has worked?
When this approach has worked. Yeah, I mean, it's, that's a really interesting question, because oftentimes I think the joint legislative? No, it was the joint finance. Marilyn, which one had Noel Garcia and
Joint Legislative Oversight Committee.
Okay, so just recently, there was a joint legislative oversight committee. You can download the video and watch it. And there were 2 stories that were told. One was told by a gentleman that Link works with who has ALS and is in a nursing home, but wanted to be home, not in a nursing facility. And the other was from a self-advocate named Noel Garcia. Some of you might know Noel, and he's kind of popped between Twin Falls and Meridian and Boise and different places because of housing and transportation and direct care challenges. Noel, Mel Levitin with the Silk told Terry's story. Terry obviously couldn't be there because he's in a nursing facility. Noel Garcia, with Christine Pisani at the DD Council's help, told his story. And I don't think I've ever seen a reaction from lawmakers like I saw in that committee. And, Marilyn, or I think Francois was there. Some of you were probably there. It brought legislators to tears, like literally to tears. And, Ilana Rubel was apologizing. Representative Rubel was apologizing to Noel because the legislature had failed him as an Idahoan. and after that, lawmakers were coming up and telling people that, they heard them and that they know something needs to be done, and they're working on it. So to me, I would go back and I would look at that hearing, and that was probably some of the most powerful testimony, at least on this issue I've heard, but probably in my time working around issues in the legislature, which, Francois has got way more experience than I do doing that. But the story that he told was so personal and just so brutally honest about what he faces, that it left people in silence, to be honest. I don't know if anybody else who was there wants to share about that, but it was incredibly powerful.
Jeremy, I'd like to, we're about 10 minutes behind, so we need to move along, but I want to share just one comment about that before we move into our breakouts. And that is everybody in that committee room had a tear or was crying hard. But what I think, based on what Laura's comment was about, has this ever made a difference? What's going to be really telling is how you share your story with your legislator between now and then to reinforce what Noel said, so that when the legislature comes together, it's not easy to push that out of their mind. You're a reminder to them about the same issues that Noel was bringing forward. And so if you haven't had a chance to hear that, we can share a link with you about where you can listen to that testimony. But I think we need to move on so that we'll have time for people to develop an ask related to their story and then share. I think more people will be comfortable sharing in their small groups than they might be in the big group, Jeremy.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so if we could do that, and then we have a short break, and then we'll come back together, and I think that's when Francois takes over with taking us down the legislative path.
Okay, I'll open up the breakout rooms.
Okay.
Do I need to stop sharing my screen?
Probably.
Edwina,
Yes. Hi,
this is Denise.
Hi, Denise.
Finally, just got off work. What are we doing?
We are jumping into breakout rooms. And then each of Jeremy and Francois and Marilyn can help direct you. But we created our asks, and then we're going to share them in a smaller group.
Ah, okay.
Do you see a breakout room? Oh, let me move you to one.
I really don't need to be in one, Edwina.
Okay. Oh, let me move you out of it then. Hold on. Yeah, you can just not join it then.
Because I have been doing a lot of asking lately. Writing letters.
That's good though, fighting the good fight.
What's the weather like over in Boise?
It is pretty cold. It was warm until today, and today it's rainy and cold. How about you?
It has been raining all day here.
Yep. I don't know if this happens in your area, but I feel like Boise always skips fall, and it makes me sad. I'm like, we just had summer, and now it's winter.
Well, not yet. You live in the tropics. I half expect by morning to wake up and see snow on the foothills.
Oh, yikes.
If not on some of my higher elevations, which is like long overdue. Okay, well, so much for that fingernail. Okay.
But yeah, just to recap some things that you may have missed. Marilyn talked a little bit about different like caregiving in general and lots of things that you are aware of. And then Jeremy kind of went through the beginning of like creating your ask and your story and what to share and what not to share. And you'll get the recording and slides after as well. So if you want to go through that at all. And then we're going to take a short break after this. And this is about a 10-minute activity. And then Francois will come back and kind of talk more about the legislator and stuff. But we are currently recording as well, just so you're aware.
Yeah, I knew that. Which is okay. Alrighty. Thank you, Edwina.
Of course. I'm glad you're here.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope everybody had a chance to write down a couple of nuggets. And I know in our small group, we had a couple of wonderful examples. And we're going to have a chance to share stories with one another later in the exercise. So right now, I think you've all earned a break. And I would ask you to take 10 minutes, step away, stand up, get a drink of water, and we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. So thank you very much.
All right, Diane, you got to work on your ask. You got to work on, yeah.
I just wish we had more time because we had a couple of really good ones in our group. And I think there were others that we just didn't get a chance to hear from.
All right, it is 2:40. We'll give you just a couple more seconds to join in if you are still making it back from getting some coffee or what I call a refreshing beverage, which is my Diet Coke, anything like that. And we'll go into our next segment of our presentation. So I hope you guys all stretched because we're going into some of the mundane parts of our legislative journey and our storytelling journey into the minutia that is the legislative path. So I hope you guys are well caffeinated. I know I got you after break, so you're probably snoozing just a little bit, but we'll try and catch you up to being excited about what we are doing today. All right. So first of all, we are going to focus on the Idaho legislative path. So when we talk about that, we're talking about the Idaho State Legislature, but we wanted to make sure everyone kind of knew the difference of where maybe your story and your ask might lie. So we've talked about our story, we've talked about our ask. Now we're trying to determine, okay, what do we do with that story and where do we tell it and to whom? So first of all, locating your lawmakers. You know, there's federal, state, and local of who you can talk to. And basically at the federal level, that's your U.S. Congress, your representatives and senators. In Idaho, we have 4 because we have 2 congressional districts. North Idaho and to part of Boise area is Russ Fulcher, and Mike Simpson takes the southern Idaho area. If you don't know where your congressional district lies, you can look that up. In the state, we have 105 members. That's 35 legislative districts. That's 1 senator per legislative district and 2 state representatives. All of those serve a 2-year term, so they'll be on your ballot next year, every single one of them. And the Idaho legislature meets annually. That's different in every single state. If you know about one state's legislature, you know about one state's legislature. Everyone is very different. And they're not the same as if you know the federal one, because the way a bill becomes law at the federal scene is not the same as it becomes law in the state scene. And you'll see some differences if you know much about the federal when we talk about the state. But like I said, we're talking about the state here today. In every one of these slides, I think we'll have all these links to different areas that you can go to later. So this first one is to the legislative directory, and I'm going to pull that one up real quickly here. This is what the legislative directory looks like. So if you want to know anything about the legislative session, it will probably be in this book. You can get it online. There's a link here, and you can also buy it at the gift shop. So this will go through, you know, your legislative districts within the state. It'll go through a who's who in the House and the Senate. These are probably really small, so you can't see this as well. I'll make it a little bit bigger so you can kind of see. It's basically everything you might need to know in a session. Later in the book, it'll tell you dates, deadlines, all that kind of stuff. And that is available to you either at right around the beginning of session within the first week. Digital copy will become available, and then a printed version you can get at the books at the gift shop. There's also links in here to your cities and counties. So if you want and have an issue that is on a local level, you have contacts there as well. So when we talk about that, what does that mean? So let's take a housing issue, for example. So at the national level for housing, you might have federal law that looks at accessibility type of things, you know, mandating it throughout the nation that they need to have certain accessibility type laws. On the state level, it might be we're looking at workforce housing, that we're going to fund that through state funds. At the city level, it might be zoning ordinances that, you know, you might have to have zero-step housing in your available if you're doing some kind of affordable housing, that so many units needs to be zero-step so that people can get into their house. So that's kind of an idea, that general housing issue, but you have different areas where you might be requesting an ask from these different lawmakers. So hang on, my thing is not advancing. There we go. So I'm going to look at with you the legislative website. Now, this is an exciting bit of news for you that first of all, there's 3 most important things that you want to look at in here that for you. Basically, how to identify your legislator, that's who you talk to, how to find a bill as you're going through the legislative process. And then we know there's a bill. Okay, so where is it in the process and how do you find that? So we'll go through that a little bit, but I'm going to show you the website first. So this is the landing page right here. Anytime you want to get back to this page, there is this dome at the top, and that dome takes you to the home page. So if you're somewhere deep into some part of the website, you don't know how to get back to this page, click on that dome and you'll get right here. This right here, let me see if I can go on laser. Whoops, I'm sorry, that's not what I want to do. I want to, okay, I see what we're doing. Sorry about that. Let me go back here. I was hoping to get my pointer on that, but that's not working. So in this part right here under the calendar, this is where you're going to find during session the things that are happening at any time. So you'll have links to your committee meetings, you'll have links to special committees, you'll have different notices of what's going on. So right now, if we look at this, and let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger so you can see this. You'll see that there's some committee meetings coming up. So today we have a committee on federalism. Next week, their legislative council. We have the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee coming up. And you can click on any of these and it'll take you to an agenda for the day. You can come up to the top. You can find who's your legislator here. And then there's a menu of different things across up here to take you to any part of the state. Legislative sessions also has come down here. This is where you're going to find your bills. Anything happening between the 2 sessions is going to be happening here in the interim. Any committee information will be under this tab, and then your information about your Senate and House members. We'll go through some of these things as we go through these slides, but this is, like I said, this is what the website looks like and where you navigate to anything you need during the legislative session.
Well, Francois,
so,
what are the committees doing between sessions? And is that something we should be looking at?
So it could be. So there's not committees technically being held like your normal regular committees. Those only happen during this session. But you have other like special committees. Like this committee on federalism isn't a regular committee. It's a special committee. So if there's something within this body or this subject area that you want to be involved in, then yes, you should definitely keep track of it. What we have been watching this whole interim session is this Medicaid Managed Task Force. And that's where they're talking about looking at how Medicaid might change in order to save the state money. And that doesn't always necessarily equal to the best care for those on Medicaid. So we watch this really closely, the ideas that they're coming up. Our Care Can't Wait, Marilyn's going to be talking about that later, really looked at what they're doing there, had a lot of people testifying during the interim, and really influencing where that task force is going and what those legislators were thinking about on that task force by contacting them during the interim, by testifying during those committees. And this is where you'd find out any of those that might be happening. Does that make sense? So the legislative process is pretty complicated. I had fun putting together this slide here. You'll see there's like all sorts of little arrows and going all different directions. And what I really wanted to convey to you in this process is at any given time, any of these stops are where a bill can be stopped. So from bill drafting, a committee chair has to approve a hearing. So if they don't approve a hearing, the bill doesn't go forward. If you go over here on the Senate committee or a House committee hearing, if it doesn't get this do pass recommendation, it doesn't move forward. You go to the full Senate House hearing. If it doesn't, again, pass, it doesn't move forward. So understanding where your bill is in the process, how it gets from the bill drafting all the way to being signed by the governor. So you've gone through this entire path of all these loop-de-loops, all these different options. it has to go through every single one of those steps. So I'll go through that just real briefly here. So a bill has to be drafted. It has to be submitted by a legislator. So you have a bill idea, you want something happen, you have to go to a legislator who will then ask Legislative Services Office to draft the bill. And they are the owner of that bill. You are not, they are. Now they can share it if they want to, but it is their property and it won't be public until it is properly presented to a committee, which is right here in this corner here. So it can start in the House side, can start on the Senate side, it doesn't matter. Once it goes into the committee, it has to get a due pass recommendation saying, the committee is saying to the floor, whether that's House or Senate, that we like this and we think it should pass. Now it could go to the floor with without a recommendation. So there is that possibility, but that doesn't happen very often. So from there, if it gets a due pass recommendation or, a no recommendation, goes to the full floor, it has to pass there. And then it goes to the other side of the rotunda. So it'll go from the House to the Senate or the Senate to the House. And again, the committee chair has the authority and the power to stop the bill at that point. And that's one thing that's very, again, it's a power play by committee chairs. It's also a way to stopping a lot of legislation that just hasn't been fully baked or is just not popular. Maybe the two sides haven't agreed on anything. So it's a powerful tool. Not everyone likes that tool, but it is something that happens a lot. A lot of bills will get held in the committee drawer. So let's say the committee chair approves the hearing. It goes to the second side now, where it was in the first. So if it was in the House and now it's in the Senate, has to be due pass recommendation, goes to the floor. And in any of these things, they can amend the bill. So let's say in the second chamber, they amend the bill. It has to now be approved by the other side to accept those changes. So that's where I've got this red arrow going to the other side, voting to accept the changes. That was from the other side. If it fails there, again, the bill fails. It doesn't move forward. So once all of that happens, it goes up to the governor where at that time he can then sign the bill or veto the bill or let it go into law without signing it. This is a very simplified version of this. There's so many tangents in this, but does anybody have any questions about how that works? Okay, so moving on then. So now we know the process, right? So we first now want to figure out, okay, so who's my lawmaker? Who do I talk to about this? So we go back to our legislative website and we go to the very top. We go to who's my legislator. And I am going to add in my work address here. I don't know my work address apparently. Let's see who comes up. Here we go. So we're in District 19, and it tells us that my representatives where my office is Senator Wintrow, Representative Necochea, and Representative Mathias. So if you want to contact Representative Mathias, you can click on his picture and it will take you to the information about him. And it's always good to read this. Okay, so he is a graduate of BSU and BS in criminal justice. So this is a way to kind of look for ways that ties to him and how you can really reach him and connect with him. He's in the Coast Guard, he's married, has 2 young children, all of those things. Let's say you served in the Coast Guard. That might be a great way to say, hey, I served in the Coast Guard too. Or like me, my dad was in the Coast Guard. So, way to really start that conversation with a legislator. So you can, again, you would push the little dome button at the top, brings you back to the main menu. Again, that's who's my legislator. So as we do some of this stuff, we had it set up for a little tech snack that you can do this on your own, but we weren't sure how many of you would have 2 screens to be able to do that. But we encourage you, once you get the slides, to really try some of these tech snacks now to find out how to do some of these things before session. Oops, I went too far. So in following this bill through the process, we are looking at the committees, and this is where the real work happens in the House and the Senate. So oftentimes a lot of people focus on the the House or Senate floor, because that's where all the pomp and circumstance might happen. You have the discussions back and forth about bills, but really the work is in the committee. So if you come in here and you click on any of those links, I'm going to come back over here and show you. So you click on committees, you click on like a House standing committee, and you'll find all the House standing committees. And these are ones that are during session. They meet, some meet every day, some meet every other day. And you can find out who is in every single one of these committees. So it lists all the Republicans in this first side, all the Democrats on this side, and they're all listed in order of seniority on the committee. So how long they have served in the legislature. If you click on the actual committee name, it'll take you to this screen right here, which this will reset in the next session of 2024. And you can find any agenda, the minutes from it once they are completed and signed. So these don't show up till maybe about 2 weeks after a meeting. And then you can download the audio video. So if you missed that meeting, you can download it and watch it later. And this is one of the places that you can find this to actually download the audio and video. Again, you click up at the top, take you back to the main screen. And again, that was in committees. Now there's different types of committees. I just want to point that out. There's Senate committees, House committees, joint committees, and then the interim and special committees. And interim and special committees are the ones that are meeting this summer. So the joint standing committees, the most important ones that we really work with are the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. That's the one that funds everything. And then the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee. And that's the one that has, that basically authorizes the special studies that you hear us talking a lot about. So the Bill Center. So the Bill Center is how you find the bills itself. So you're in session, you go to this legislative session here, and this is where you can find the Bill Center. And you can change any session here to, let's say you wanted to look at something that happened in 2010. You can find it there, but we'll look in 2023, and you'll see most of the time you can either go by bill number or you can go by topic. So let's look at topic. So let's say we wanted to look at, let's say Medicaid. We go to Medicaid here. Oh, it's under public assistance. So I'll click on public assistance. And these are all the Medicaid bills that happened in the legislature this year. So if we click on, if you look on this side, if it still has the bill number, this is House Bill 214, it means it did not pass. But if it has this Chapter 154, we click on that, it passed, and it's Session Law Chapter 154. And if you look into any of these bills, it'll tell you a lot about the bill. This is the most important part, this bill text. If I click on that, it'll take you to the actual bill, so you can read that there. If you go to the statement of purpose here, it'll tell you, hopefully, the layman's terms of what the bill is about. Now, that doesn't always happen, because I read through some of these things. I was like, I still have no idea what this bill is about, and I have to read through it and think about it. But this is supposed to be a general statement that anybody reading it will know what's in the bill. And then this fiscal note underneath it, this will say how much the bill will cost, basically. But one thing to understand there is it's only the cost to the general fund that needs to be in this fiscal note. So if you have a bill that costs business money or costs somebody else money, or if it costs a local government money, it doesn't necessarily need to be in this fiscal note. So anytime you read this, you have to really think about, okay, so what aren't they telling me in this fiscal note? Where else might this be influenced in that monetary way? So other things you can find in this is, you know, what happened to it. So it went to Health and Welfare Committee. It was passed on the floor of the, let's see, what are we at? The Senate. And there's 23 lawmakers that said yes, 12 that said no, and 0 that abstained. And you can see who the floor sponsor was. You can see that it then went to the other side. It was voted on the other side here, and who voted for it, who voted against it, and then when it was signed by the governor. So all of that is available in this portion of the website. If you look at it by bill number, I'll go back to that in a second. Let's see if sorry, we'll kind of, if I go back one more. One more. There we go. You go by bill number, this is kind of easier to see where all these bills are. Now, it won't be by subject, but it'll be by what bill number it is. But you can see here what happened and what part of the legislative process it is. Obviously, a lot of these are law now because the session is over. But during the session, you'll see a lot of these, okay, it's in House State Affairs, House, you know, some of these will be stuck in the Senate. So the last place it was at, the Senate Health and Welfare. So you can keep track of where it might be. You can see it even says when it's failed. So the Senate failed, and that's only if it happens on the floor. What you don't know is what happened in committee. So you might have a bill that was introduced and it just sits there like this one in House business. You don't know if it's still waiting to be heard or if maybe it failed in the committee, and you won't know that unless you ask or you know somebody or you listen to the hearing. So be kind of cognizant of that even though it says House business, it may not go any further that session. And then the last thing on this slide I want to talk about is the Idaho in session. And this is where you watch the hearings at. So if you click on the in session, and hang on. It will look like this. So if you go this route to find something, you will need to know what room number your committee is in. So if you're trying to find the House Health and Welfare, you're going to need to know that House Health and Welfare meets in East Wing 20 in order to hear that one. Now, you don't always have to know that. You can go to the agendas. So basically, if I go back to the site, if I go back to the dome again, go back to the committee, go to a House Standing Committee. I'm going really fast for this, but you can negotiate through this later. So if I go to any of these agendas, it will give a link right here at the top, and that will link you to the actual session that you're want to see. So like I said, there's several ways to get to those media areas to watch things. And from any committee agenda, you can get to the committee session. That was a lot, and I'm going super fast, but there's a lot on there. One of the things, the other place you can go to is this digital media archive, and there's a link in this as well. And so I'm going to pull up the website and show you where that is. So on the website again, you can go right here, live audio video streaming, or there's this big button right here, and that's where you get to the archive. So in here, you can select what year you want to look at. You can select what you want to see. So let's say I want to go to a house, the House chamber, I hit the wrong one. And then you can download the video from any day during the session to watch it. I will warn you though, if you're doing the House chambers or the Senate chambers, it usually takes a long time. Sometimes the other ones too, depending on how long the meeting was. It takes a long time to download some of these audio and videos. So it is more time convenient to watch it live, so you don't have to wait for them to download, but they're always available for you to watch later. Okay, that was a lot. What I want to do now is kind of show you, I did some of this here. What I'm actually going to do to save time is I'm going to ask you later on, try and find these in things. We went through that bill session, right? We went to, I'll show you again where to find it. So again, you go to home. This is a little bit different. Go to home, go to your legislative sessions, and then the bill center is here. And so on your own, go and see if you can find House Bill 288 in the 2023 session and see who was the sponsor of the contact. That'll be in that information. Look to see, was it signed by the governor? If so, when? That all will be on that area. And then try and say, okay, let's go to the 2022 session. How do I negotiate to there? Find out what committees those bills were on, and then what happened to the bill. And these are all things that are very good to know going into the session on how to find these things out so that you can follow these bills through the session as they're going. Any questions about that? Okay, so let's say, so we've talked a lot about our stories today. We talked about our stories, we talked about our asks, what we're going to do with those things. We talked about meeting our legislators in the elevator, giving them the elevator speech, right? The other thing to do with your story is to go formally before your legislative committees and tell your story. And that's what's called testimony. So typically, your testimony is going to be in either support or opposition to the bill. And you want to keep it to 2 to 3 minutes, because most of the time, if there's a lot of people testifying, they're going to limit it to that. So make sure you have your testimony kind of honed into that 2 to 3 minutes, make it as compelling as you can. And as we talked about, make sure that ask or the why, maybe in this situation, the ask is you're going to support or oppose the legislation, but that why, that compelling why part of your story, it really comes through in that 2 to 3 minutes. Address your marks through the committee chair. So one of the things that you need to know is when you're giving testimony, every comment, everything has to go through the committee chair. So you say, Senator Harris, Senator, so-and-so. So everything is Chairman Harris, then to Senator so-and-so when you respond. So it's very easy when you're testifying. You give your testimony, you think everything's great. The senator, when the senators say, I have a question, and the chairman says, go ahead and ask your question. The senator that asks the question, so easy to turn to them and just respond, but you cannot do that. What you have to do is once they ask their question, the committee chair will go back to them and say, Francoise, this is a question, will you answer it? Then you say, Chairman so-and-so, Senator so-and-so, and then you respond. That's really important, because if you don't do that, they will stop you and make you kind of start over. So what this might look like. So you're in a committee, the chairman will call you up before the committee. You'll stand before the microphone. You'll adjust the microphone, make sure you're speaking right into that microphone, because you want people to hear it, not only in the room, but also it'll be broadcast on that live media that we just showed you. And you want to always identify yourself. He says, I am Francoise Cleveland. I am the Associate State Director of ARP Idaho, and I'm here today to testify in support of X. And then I go through, and then I make sure at the end, again, I say, thank you for hearing me today. Again, I want to urge you to, have a due pass recommendation to the Senate. Now, you may forget some of these nuances and jargon, but you always want to kind of bookend it with what you want, your story in the middle, and compelling. And then you'll say, do you have any questions? And then the chairman will ask the committee, are there any questions? And at that point, again, is when a senator will say, or a representative will say, I have a question, Mr. Chairman. And the chairman will identify them, say, go ahead. They say their question. And again, you direct everything through the chair. Chairman, so-and-so, Senator, so-and-so, and you answer the question. It's not hard, but it can be a little frightening, I guess, to begin with. You don't know what questions you're going to get asked, but typically in these types of situations, they're usually pretty good about being nice to people that are there on their own. Okay. If you're going to testify at all, you need to register in advance. And let me show you where you do that. I can't show you exactly because they're not live links right now. So all you need to do is go to an agenda, and here's the sample agenda. You'll see at the very bottom of this agenda, there's this link right here to testify. You need to click on that. In the session, it'll take you to a form. You fill out the form. You basically have to say your name, whether you're in opposition or support. You will say what why you're testifying, and if you're going to do so live, if you're going to do so virtually, or maybe you just want to submit printed testimony, you can do that as well. Any questions about that? Testifying. Okay. So, and I guess I'm looking for live questions. I haven't checked the chat. So if I missed one in the chat, let me know. Okay. So other ways to share your story is by email and letters to the editor. So if you have your email address for your legislators, and you can find that when you locate your legislators, make sure you tell them you are their constituent. That's very important. Right at the very top, I am your constituent, because they will delete all the ones that are not their constituents. They're like, they'll just delete them. I hate to say it, but that's what happens to a lot of them. So make sure you say, I am your constituent, and then be very brief in your story. Try and put it in the email part of it. Don't do it in an attachment, because oftentimes they won't open the attachment. So put your story in writing that way. Letters to the editor are always great. You know, your legislators do read the newspapers. I know that that's kind of a dying breed right now, but newspapers are a way that legislators get information about opinions and what the populace is thinking. So definitely use that tool as well. Okay, in here, I'm not going to open these links for you. Actually, I will. I have them up, so we'll do them real quickly. These are what different like templates on what you can use in doing your emails. Here's sample letters to the editor, or letters to legislators. And then jargon. Let's say I don't really know all the jargon that's being used. These are some extra tools that you can look at to get more information. And like I said, we have a lot of information in here, but some of it's going to have to be some homework for you as you're looking through this. So one of these, we have these deep dive opportunities, right? And this what we're really thinking of is these are things that we don't have time to go through today, but are important to know. And this one is about the administrative rules process. So as you're talking about things to your legislator or thinking about your ask, you know, one of the questions to ask is this a statute or is this a rule? The difference is a statute is what is in the Idaho Code. And the Idaho Code is what is passed by the legislature. That is the highest hierarchy next to the, I guess, Constitution is the highest. I apologize. Constitution, statute, underneath statute is administrative code. And that's basically how the statute is going to be implemented by the agency. Those rules do have to be approved by the legislature, but it is done by agency. And that's really where a lot of those details comes in on how laws are implemented across the state. So following through your bill through the process, basically there's a lot of different ways. The first one, of course, we want to point out is the Idaho Caregiving Alliance. We have fantastic interns that do a yeoman's work following the legislative process, doing all of the narrative on pulling all the information together about bills that impact caregivers across the state. So if you are not registered to get those weekly updates, please do. We have our intern was introduced earlier to who's going to be doing those legislative reports weekly. That's on the call today. I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was.
Adrian.
Say again?
Adrian Rodriguez.
Oh, Adrian, yes. I guess I was thinking it was the other person you introduced earlier today. So Adrian, yes. Hi, Adrian. You are going to be doing it. That's fantastic. It's probably the best source of information that you can use during the session that I know of. Other ones that you can do, and you can click on these later. Capital Letters is something, it's a free service for the Idaho statesman that goes through just what's happening in the legislature each day. And the Idaho Press, the I Am Boise is a good resource. The Idaho Capital Sun is another free news resource that you can sign up for. And then the Idaho Reports, they have a weekly public television, about an hour on Friday nights that you can watch. They usually have a report for what happened in the week. They have guest speakers. And then they also have a blog that you can subscribe to as well. And then there is bill tracking, and I'm going to show you this real fast as well. I have this somewhere. Right here. So if you have different bills that you're following, you can track it in this bill tracking list. And the link again is on that webpage. But you say, okay, I'm going to start a tracking list for 2023. I have an error, probably because I've been in this too long. Hang on, let me see if I can get this to work again. I don't know why it's not working. It was working earlier. Sorry about that. Oh, it's going to ask me for my password again. Hang on. See if I type that in right. Okay. So 2023, from here, you can add or remove bills. So you come over here, you could add any bill this way. Then you can view your list. So now I've got these 2 bills, and they're going to send me emails every time this bill changes. And that's a good way to keep track. Now, I will say that sometimes the bill moves faster than the tracking system moves. So just be wary that just because you haven't received an email doesn't mean that the bill hasn't moved. But it will get to you there, especially earlier in the session. It's that last couple of weeks where if things move super fast, that they kind of get lag time on there. But that's how you would set that up. And then it'll send you an email confirming those bills that you put into your bill tracker. And then the other way to keep track of what's going on is your legislative newsletter. And I'll show you how to do that. So basically, if we go back to our dome, to their front page, we go to, let's say, our Senate. Come on. It's thinking. You go to members. And you'll see in these members, they have subscribed to mailing lists. So you can click on all of them. They don't have to be your legislator. So you just fill in your information here. It's very simple. Now that you all have my email address, you can email me all hours of the day. And you submit, and you'll get this saying that thanks for signing up, and you're in. And you'll get a confirmation email to your email saying that you signed up. Now, not all legislators will send anything. Some of them don't use the system, but it's a good way to keep track of what's going on, especially during session when things move, and you can kind of get an idea of what your legislator thinks about things. Here's another deep dive that you could do on your own. We talked a lot about the Office of Performance Evaluation. They conduct research on issues requested by the legislature and recommended by the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee. And I will click on this so you kind of have an idea of what this looks like. We talked about some reports earlier. If you go to reports here, you'll see all the reports that they are working on. These are underway. That means they haven't been published yet. These have been published. And this one was just published yesterday. Just printed it today. So they have good information. You can see all the years back. So if you click on these, you kind of go through like the Medicaid rate setting. I've heard some people earlier talking about Medicaid rate settings, and that is a great way to find more information. These are very detailed. They have recommendations, what legislature should do, but the information on these are just you can't find this information anywhere else. I mean, they do a lot of work for a year, looking at the data behind and what other states are doing. And anytime you can get a study from them, it's always really good. And that was a really quick introduction for all of that. So did I miss any questions in the chat?
Let's see what we've got.
Okay, Laura said, so how many times is too much? I've emailed, called, texted, etc. my legislators and federal representatives. I'm not getting responses. So the best way to get your legislators to listen to you is in person. So if you're not finding that they're responsive to these other ways, especially since you've already emailed them, you've called them, you texted them, that's always, the texting is probably the next best way of finding them, because if you have their cell phone number, usually they have to look at it. find out where they are. Find out where their favorite coffee shop is that they like to hang out. Find out friends that they might hang out with, restaurants, places where you can catch up with them. You know, some of them will have, you know, these like district meetings where they have, well, they'll listen to you. Some other ways that you can do it is if you hang out outside their committee. I know that's probably not something a lot of you can do, but if you hang outside the committee, I mean, that's why lobbyists are called lobbyists, is because that's what they do to get to these legislatures, is standing outside those committees until they come out and they have to kind of say hello and talk to you. But, you know, I don't know if there's too many times that you can contact. I guess, yeah, if you contact them every day, they're going to think you're stalking them. But as long as you're polite, that you are, that you're not overrunning them. I mean, once a week might be okay. Every day probably is not. They won't listen to you. I don't know. Anybody, Jeremy, Marilyn, do you have any thoughts on how often is too often?
Well, I don't know about how often is too often, but you might ask them, is there some information that you need that will help you with a decision on this that I might be able to get for you, so that it kind of fosters that exchange back and forth. I know Jeremy put in the chat, write a letter. People don't get letters anymore.
Yeah.
So
yeah, Marilyn, this is Jeremy. I put that in there because I talked a little bit about upping the accountability, and trying to get them to own the conversation with you. So a handwritten letter to their home address is a little bit of a disruptor, because they get texts and emails and they get this bombarded with all this stuff it looks like everything else. A handwritten letter at their home address makes it way more personal and stands out. And it's something that might capture their attention when they're not in front of a computer. And they might be at the dinner table. They might talk about it with their spouse. So I think it's not the be all end all, but it's just a little tactic that could disrupt the information flow they're used to enough to get their attention, to say, hey, I'm going to take this letter to work with me and put it on the desk, and I'm going to remember to call them. So that's the only reason I added it in there. It just ups the accountability by the decision maker to get back with you.
Another thing is, if you know someone who's an influencer with them, one of their colleagues, maybe a seatmate, who they will listen to. They may not listen to you, but they maybe listen to Representative Brown, who sits next to them. And you could maybe have a conversation with Representative Brown and kind of share that information with them, and they then could influence the person that you're trying to influence. There's just a lot, and quite frankly, folks, you're not going to sell everybody. There are going to be those people that what you're asking for is so out of sync with where they are that you're not going to convince them. But that shouldn't let you give up early. You should at least try to establish that relationship and dialogue, because you just never know when you're going to change somebody's mind. And Francoise has a wonderful example of that. If you want to take just 30 seconds and share the Representative Scott story, Francoise.
Sure. So last year during legislative session, we were talking about renters' fees. And, you know, renters' fees is not a real popular subject in the legislature. They feel like, you know, that type of stuff shouldn't be regulated. But the bill was passed for appropriate fees. And the discussion was, well, what's an appropriate fee? And Heather Scott asked, well, do you have an example of what would be an inappropriate fee? You know, I think she was not having this. She was, you know, and it's not something she would typically vote for at all, if anybody knows Representative Scott. So the example that they gave was a little boy caught a praying mantis and took the praying mantis inside and had him in a cup. And the landlord considered that a pet and charged the family a $300 pet fee and a monthly fee after that for having a pet. And Heather Scott was like, what? She's like, I'm a biologist. I love insects. I love praying mantises, and that's ridiculous. And she ended up voting in favor of the bill. I mean, that's something that floored me. That was just a wonderful example of how a compelling story that that she resonated with. You know, had it been a snake, who knows what would have happened, but it was a praying mantis. She loved praying mantises. She's a biologist, so it really resonated with her, and she changed her vote based on that story of this little boy with a praying mantis.
So you never know. You never know where a story is going to lead somebody or what you might say that will resonate with their personal experience. So just stay true to your kind of storytelling path. And here are, if you want to click on the next screen.
And Marilyn?
Yes.
I just quickly, I didn't mention this before. Representative Scott is a great example of how you should never assume negative intent by lawmakers. All of these lawmakers, I think it's safe to assume they ran and they got elected because they want to do something for their community. And sometimes that's hard for us to see or understand because some of the legislation is so polarizing. It might be the opposite of what we would do. But it's always, I think, good to go into those conversations polite, respectful, but from a place of assuming good intent by the lawmakers, that they're not in this to create havoc for all of us and destroy the state, but that they're in there trying to do the right thing too. Heather Scott is a great example of that. And she's a great example of somebody who you can change a lawmaker's mind, even some that you don't think would ever move on any issue at all that you're for. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that intent, assume good intent.
Exactly.
Thank you.
The other thing I would offer to this too is look for innovative ways to get to your legislator. Look for ways that maybe not other people are reaching to them, that gives you like that edge to be noticed. Sometimes it's like, put your envelope in a red envelope instead of a white envelope, because it might be something that they might open, things that that might be just a little bit different that they don't necessarily see very often. The other part too is, even though you haven't heard back from your legislator, that doesn't mean that they haven't seen it and that they haven't looked at it. They haven't given it due thought, because they get so many, sometimes in the middle of session, they get thousands of emails and they don't have the time to respond to every single email or text or letter, but that doesn't mean they didn't see it. So keep at it. Like I said, but always be friendly, always be nice, always be helpful. Identify yourself as their constituent, and say things differently. Don't send the same one every time. Offer new information, offer something different, so that it doesn't waste their time in their mind.
And it's always more helpful if you're their constituent. Your legislator may not serve on health and welfare or JFAC, but for those who do, it's really important for their constituents to contact them, because the people who are working those issues have an outsized influence on those particular issues. So this is a list of partners, organizations that are working on these same issues alongside you. And I'm not going to open them all. I think if you open this one, no, it's not. I'm not going to be able to do it. Would you open, just say, the Centers for Independent Living?
Yes.
And see, it shows you the 3 independent living centers, and you can go to any of those and get information about what they're doing, who their staff is, positions on things. That Power Independent Living that Jeremy and I worked on, that's available through the Links website. So there's I would suggest you just go in when you get this information from us and just cruise around on those websites and look at what they have to offer. the Idaho Caregiver Alliance will be resuming our weekly legislative updates the first week of the session. You'll be getting something, if you're on our mailing list, you'll be getting something from Adrian with kind of probably mostly what the governor said in his budget address that first week. But every week we will have some information for you that I think will be very helpful to you. But I'd like to have you, if you go to the next slide, I'm sure that all of you are involved with organizations that work alongside you. So I would appreciate it if we just take like a minute and a half and you put in the chat in the name of any organizations that you know of that you're working with that might not be on that page I just showed you. It could be a provider organization. It could be Area Agency on Aging, the Idaho Commission on Aging. It could be Legacy Court. Raise for Rare is a great example, Laura. Thank you. There's just all manner of other organizations that kind of feed into all of these. Yes, the Idaho Association of Community Providers, IACP. So if you'll put those in, then we'll capture the chat before this is over with, and we'll be able to add those to our presentation so that there are other people are made aware of the organizations that you're working with. Sarah Taves just put up an excellent one that we learned about last year, and that's Mormon Women for Ethical Government. Just a fabulous group of women who are working together for kind of peaceful reconciliation of today's problems. And we found them to be wonderful partners to work with. They were some of the loudest voices in terms of not eliminating the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee, which would have eliminated the Office of Performance Evaluation. And they waded into that and did a great job. So there are lots of organizations out there that are part of our network that we may or may not be aware of. Thanks, Sarah. So let's see what our next slide is. Oh, let's talk about these for a minute. This will take a couple of minutes. I know that when that list of issues that you all shared with us when you registered, some of those are here in terms of expanding access to respite care, including family caregivers in the healthcare team, support increased reimbursement for kin care families. I know certified family home providers have been looking for respite care for years, but an emerging one that's come out of the pandemic is paying family members to provide care. We were able to do that during the public health emergency because so many direct care staff were either ill from the virus or couldn't go into somebody's home. And so families were able to use ARPA funds to be paid to provide care for their own family members. This was primarily parents of caring for their children and spouses caring for their spouse. So this, when the public health emergency ended in May, that didn't bring back direct care workers. And so the folks that were working on this issue, if you want to click on it for just a sec, Francoise, worked with Medicaid, contacted Medicaid, many of them did, and said, we need to continue this. And the division administrator for Medicaid said, and the director of the Department of Health and Welfare said, we'll continue this through the end of the calendar year 2023. And then we'll work with CMS on what's called an 1115 waiver to get federal approval for us to continue to do this. And that's where we are right now. We're in the process of developing that waiver. If you'll scroll down to the second page, here's the issues to be resolved, and then some of the short-term, midterm, long-term asks basically is to continue doing this, but maybe broaden it, maybe make it don't limit it to spouses and parents. Maybe it's kin care. But one of the things that I learned from, no, it didn't make it. I don't think it made it in here. Yes, it did. Are those public hearings? And if there's a way, Francoise, I don't know if you can do it. If you could drop those, highlight those and drop them in the chat. Those public hearings are happening, I think, Friday and Monday next week. These are public hearings that Medicaid is having about this issue. And so take a look at those. Take a look at this draft sheet of information. I know I've been corresponding with Nathan Hill, Angela Lindig, Lara Goers, Juliet Sharon at Medicaid, a variety of people on, you know, how can we make this as useful and meaningful as possible, that is allowed by CMS and helps families here in Idaho. So I just wanted to make sure you saw that today. So there's going to be, these are the many of the issues that may bubble to the surface in the coming legislative session. But I did want to call out that one because that's been getting a lot of attention lately. And then I'm going to turn it to Jeremy to talk to a campaign that's starting up that's called Our Care Can't Wait. So Jeremy?
Yeah, so Our Care Can't Wait is basically a coalition of agencies and organizations that are attempting to advance get some traction for the legislature and Health and Welfare and Medicaid to respond to the Office of Performance Evaluation report. Diane, who I don't think is on here now, asked earlier about, you know, what is an example of when a story made a difference. I think the fact that we got the OPE report completed, which included over 700 interviews with people around the state, that we got that report completed was the result of people sharing their stories with legislators and with the Department of Health and Welfare and Medicaid. So that report outlines 3 things that are really critical for paid direct care workers who support families and unpaid caregivers. Is we need to get in front of and keep in front of reimbursement rates. Direct care workers need to be paid more. We see opportunities to increase professionalism and training. And then Medicaid needs to have more capacity to manage its program and to support a lot of the initiatives that would help the direct care workforce issue. So those 3 things are really important. And I'll draw this back to the ask and your story. The ask that you could make could simply be, please read the OPE report and do what you can to implement the recommendations, right? You're not getting into specifics. You're not telling them a certain wage. You're not talking about a specific training, but you're asking them to go to something that they should respect and they own. They're the ones who own OPE, and ask them to do what their own office has told them to do. That's something I would definitely be asking. And that campaign, Marilyn, what else do you want me to say about the Our Care Can't Wait campaign? There's going to be a couple different opportunities.
Well, I think you can move to the next.
Okay.
We can move to the next slide if Francoise can do that. Yes.
Yep. So there's a couple different things that are going on. There is a legislative luncheon on November 9th. There's a training on the 8th. And then on November 9th, there's a luncheon. And I know that the Our Care Can't Wait coalition is, trying to fill seats at this luncheon from people across waivers and across services and who represent each of the legislative districts in the state. And so we've been working to try and recruit people to be at this event. There will also be a day of action. I know that there'll be a day of action January 31st and February 1st, which is Disability Awareness Day at the Capitol. And folks will be going there to basically do a storytelling training similar to this, and then set up meetings and meet with lawmakers. There might not be room at that legislative luncheon. I do know that it was a limited number of seats, and they're being very deliberate about making sure they've got representation versus just like opening it up to everybody. So if you wanted to go to that and they had seats already filled, I would apologize and just say, look for other opportunities to engage, because there will be more. And if you're on ICA's listserv, or you on Link's listserv, or sign up with Power Independent Living, any of these places, we should be sending out notifications of opportunities to engage. Right now, Our Care Can't Wait is really focused also on getting people to, we've got a media consultant, and the media consultants are working with families, people with disabilities, caregivers, to submit op-eds in the newspapers, and potentially get in front of TV cameras, and to submit letters to the editor. So if you're interested in that, you could drop a note in the chat, and we could add you to the list to contact. But yeah, there's a lot of really coordinated work going on with a lot of organizations and people collecting and sharing stories to move the needle on this.
Thank you, Jeremy. And before I move to the next item, November is National Family Caregiver Month. And Edwina and our team have pulled together some social media posts that we are going to be posting every day during November. We'd love to have you look at them, like them, share them. And if you want to speak to that briefly, Edwina, about what they can do with that information.
Well, if they're interested, there's a toolkit that has a bunch of information on data on caregivers, as well as little tidbits of information that maybe you could include in your ask. But it also has social media posts to post on your own page to really spread awareness during Caregiver Month. And then we'll be sharing social media posts like you mentioned on our pages. So if you don't already, please follow the Idaho Caregiver Alliance on Instagram and Facebook. And we have the Family Caregiver Navigator Instagram. So yeah.
Thank you, Sheila. We're going to capture all of this information in the chat so that we don't lose those folks who've said they need this information or they want to help in this way. So one more slide. Not one more, but the next slide, Francois. This is another opportunity for you, and this is on Valentine's Day. We have resumed our Family Caregivers Legislative Lunch. It's the Capitol on the first floor. It's free, and we would ask, it's open to anyone, or if you represent an organization, we'd like to have some organizational sponsors to help put this on. But it's a great opportunity for you to contact your legislator and say, meet me on the first floor on Valentine's Day for a Valentine cookie and some lunch. And you can talk to them about some of the things you've been putting together today, about your story. It's a great opportunity. And if you haven't really met them, this is a nice opportunity to do so. The last couple of years, we've had over 30 legislators attend this lunch. So it's this is a good way to put what we've done today into practice. So next slide. So we have a few minutes. If you have any questions that you haven't had a chance to ask as we've been going along, I'm sorry we haven't had more time for you to share your stories with one another. This is proven to be a lot of information in what seems like a long time, but really is very short. So, and I thank you, Francoise, for racing through your hour so quickly. So if you've got any questions while we're all online, let's hear you.
So Marilyn, I'm going to forward the slide, one more slide, so that people know that this is our contact information.
Thank you.
And about the evaluation that the reason why is I want to take this off so we can have a conversation face to face with everyone without the slides being in the way.
Thank you.
Edwina, did you want to say anything about the evaluation before, and then we'll just go into questions for the rest of the time?
Sure. I think Marilyn mentioned it in the beginning, but in case you joined us late, I will be sending out an email in the next few days with our evaluation survey, as well as the recordings, transcript, and slides. Please fill out that quick evaluation. It really helps us have ideas for another webinar and what we can do better next time. So thanks, Francois.
All right, with that, I'll stop sharing and.
So we would, we'd love to have you raise your hand or put questions in the chat so that we can take advantage of the last few minutes we have to talk or share information.
Karen's got her hand up.
I have a quick question. I was writing things down. That luncheon on the 9th, is that open to public, or is that just special people can come to that?
That is, you need to register, and if they already have people from your legislative district, Karen, then they probably would not have room for you. But you can contact any of us, and we can put you in contact with the people who are doing that lunch.
Okay, as you answer my question, I'll give you a quick synopsis. Francisco knows, she knows, I happen to be a Hanford downwinder, and I went to Governor Little in February of 19, and he sent me to Crapo, and I did a lecture at ICOM 2 days before COVID shut down. I was to do one in February, but being a caregiver, my husband had COVID, and as it turned out, he passed away the end of August. And I'd been his 24/7 caregiver for over 13 and a half years.
Oh, Karen.
I do have medical background since 1960. So I am already involved with veterans. I want to be involved with more of you because I was trained by a nuclear physicist, doctors from OHSU and University of Seattle about downwinders, and I am a downwinder. And I know Kirkthorne was supposed to have acquired monies for people that had one of the cancers, and especially in Emmett, since Emmett is the third most radiated community in the United States. I would like to also see more of that happen, people, so they're not losing their homes because of medical expenses. So I would like to join you.
Oh, that's a very compelling story right there in a nutshell. Thank you so much. And I think Jim County, as well as Idaho County, were supposed to get resources because they were downwinders. So those are kind of federal issues that are best taken to Senators Crapo and Risch. But we'd love to have you as part of our network.
Karen, where are you? Where do you live?
I live 2 miles north of Eagle off of Highway 55.
Okay.
I'm in Ada County.
In Ada County.
Right now, I don't have a way to print from my laptop. If there's some way we can make connection, I'll even give you my phone number or whatever, or if you can get my email address, and I would really like to make connection because this is part of my healing. I mean, right. I have like now over 63 years working in the medical field.
Oh. Yeah, Karen, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act has been lacking in Idaho for decades, and it's hard to think that that's still even an issue.
Well, I'm from northeastern Oregon,
yeah.
And I won't go back to Oregon until it becomes Idaho. You know, the new, I've had people say, well, how come you don't, and I said, put politics, taxes, you name it.
Do we
but
have?
I came here a long way. I came here from Arizona.
Erin, do we have your email?
Pardon?
Do we have your email?
Let me give it to you. It's
I
okay.
believe we do. I was corresponding
You
with
do.
who we
I
are.
Okay.
was the one having problem getting on. All of a sudden it popped in under AARP.
Okay, well, we'll be, as long as we've got a way to contact you, we'll be in touch.
Yeah, do contact me, and I'm going to write down your name so I recognize somebody. I'm here kind of wrestling around with a hyper dog.
Okay.
He likes my attention more than I'm giving him right now. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for giving us your time.
And I think they're planning on maybe having me do a lecture in the spring. We're talking fall, but we're too late now. Maybe because I have to be very careful about being exposed where it were like to get COVID, because I worked at the Portland VA and ended up I had MS, and my civilian doctors advised I don't work around communicable disease. But I'm doing this other because I know it, and I could not go to my death and not share what I know.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there others who have a question or something they'd like to share? If I don't see your hand raised.
Francois, just a small note. The presentation included that page on types of activities that we might get involved in. And it mentioned both public official scorecards and candidate endorsements. And I want to make sure that our AARP hat's on right with those two activities.
ARP does not endorse any candidates.
I'll make sure I amend the presentation.
Other comments, questions?
Yeah, Marilyn, I'll just add to what Guy said, that just so folks know if they don't, some of us are state agencies, some of us are 501c3, some of us are 501c4s, some of us are private businesses, and the rules around what you can and can't do around elections is different for each of those entities. So as Link is a 501c3, we can't endorse a candidate, we can't, rally for one political party or another. So there's a lot of restrictions on what we can do. We can share stories with lawmakers about how the decisions they make impact us. And then we can lean on other organizations and let them do that campaign work and all of that. So that's the reason why some groups do that and some groups don't do that. It's a tax status thing.
Yeah, the Caregiver Alliance doesn't do any endorsing either, but we do connect people with other people. Is there someone within the ICA that could take a quick look at our stories and asks once written? Yes, absolutely. Send them to any of us. We'd be happy to. Okay, I'm looking for any.
Kaylee.
Marilyn and Jeremy, one more thing I wanted to ask.
Sure.
Because you are working with the state, I am very well acquainted with Chuck Winder. He's from Oregon originally. His father worked at Hanford and died of lung cancer. So there's a good connection.
That's a good connection for you to use, Karen.
That's a great connection, Karen. And I would ask Senator Winder to chat with the senator and representatives as a state legislator with our congressional delegates.
So get in touch with me and we'll
Yes.
meet and then we can put our heads together. I would love that.
Sounds good.
Haley, did you have a comment?
Yeah, so for providers, for me, for Milestone Decisions, we have houses in Coeur d'Alene, Hayden, and Idaho. So for providers that have houses in multiple places, or say you're a caregiver and you are part of this group for who you take care of, it's important to reach out to the legislators for all of those addresses, correct?
Yeah, what you could say is either I live in your district, I do business in your district, we have a home in your district, we're tie it to them so that they know there is that tie. But yes, I think definitely you can get that tie in there, do it.
And Kaylee, go into the find your legislator and put in the address of the home. And that will pop up the legislators for that district that home is located in. And that gives you that kind of constituent connection.
Any other questions? Good. Okay. Marilyn, I think we're going to start or stop right on time.
Well, thank you to all of you. Thank you especially to Francoise and to Jeremy and Edwina for all of the hard work you put in on this. And we hope that you found it useful and not too dull or complicated. And you'll be getting the information from Edwina about the evaluation, the slide deck, and the recording. And then you can kind of use that as a refresher or go back and look at those links that we didn't have time to open. So thank you all so much for spending your afternoon with us. Karen will be in contact with you. Great. And thank you again very much. And let's be sure to capture the chat, Edwina, before we close up shop.